Dave Robinson, a debt-ridden mechanic, risked his last money on a worthless plot of land at a county auction. Everyone laughed when he bought those 10 abandoned acres in the forest. But when he found an abandoned military helicopter and discovered a sealed compartment hidden under the pilot's seat, his life changed forever. What was inside transformed not only his fortune, but inspired millions around the world. The morning fog rolled over the pine-covered hills like silent ghosts, wrapping the small town of Oak Haven, Oregon, in a damp, cold embrace. The sharp whine of power saws cutting through logs echoed across the valley, mingling with the acrid smell of sap and wet wood that permeated the air. It was the sound of survival, the relentless rhythm of a community that had lived off the forest for generations. David Robinson adjusted his safety glasses and wiped the sweat from his brow with the sleeve of his faded flannel shirt. At 42, Dave carried the weight of the world on his broad shoulders, which now slumped slightly under the pressure of double shifts at the Cascade lumber mill. His hands, calloused from decades of working with metal and wood, trembled slightly as he guided a cedar beam through the circular saw. It wasn't ordinary fatigue. It was the exhaustion of a man who slept 4 hours a night and still woke with his heart racing, worrying about bills. The lunch whistle blew at 12:30 p.m., and Dave stepped away from the machine, the muscles in his back protesting. He walked to the gravel parking lot where his 1998 Ford F-150 waited, its sun-faded blue paint speckled with rust on the fenders. He sat on the tailgate, opened his dented lunchbox, and pulled out the peanut butter sandwich he'd made at breakfast. Same as always, the only one that fit the budget. "Dad?" The soft voice came through his cracked screen cell phone. Maya, his 17-year-old daughter, was calling from school during her break. "You forgot to sign the permission slip for the university visit." Dave closed his eyes. The University of Oregon. Maya had been accepted with a partial scholarship, but they still needed $18,000 a year to cover the rest. $18,000 that might as well have been $18 million, as far as Dave was concerned. "Sorry, honey. I left it at home. I'll get it when I'm back." "It's okay, Dad. I know you have a lot on your mind." Dave heard the forced maturity in his daughter's voice, the way she tried to protect him from her own dreams. That cut deeper than any saw. "Maya, you're going to college, I promise." Silence on the other end. Then in a whisper, "I love you, Dad. I love you too, honey." After he hung up, Dave sat there staring at the pines that stretched to the horizon. 2 years ago, when Sarah died of cancer, he had sworn that Maya would have every opportunity they never had. But the medical bills kept coming, even after the funeral. $127,000 in debt that was growing with interest. The house mortgage, 3 months overdue. And now the foreclosure notice stuck to the fridge, yellow like a death sentence. That night, after Maya had gone to bed, Dave sat at the kitchen table with a stack of bills and a calculator that already knew the numbers by heart. No matter how he rearranged the numbers, the result was always the same. Inevitable bankruptcy. He opened a cheap beer and turned on the old radio that had belonged to his father-in-law. The local station was running the late-night classifieds. And to round out this week's county auctions, we have a 10-acre lot in the Umpqua National Forest. No road access, no structures, no utilities. Minimum bid, $20,500. Interested parties must appear at the county courthouse tomorrow at 2 p.m. Dave paused with the bottle halfway to his lips. $20,500. It was exactly what he had in his emergency savings account, the last of the cash he had left after Sarah's funeral costs. His rational mind screamed that it was madness, that land with no access wasn't even worth the paper the deed was printed on. But something deeper was whispering, a voice that sounded like Sarah in her last days, weak, but insistent. "Sometimes you just have to bet on yourself, Dave." He took another sip of beer and looked at their portrait on the coffee table. Sarah smiling on their wedding day, holding Maya, then 5, in her arms. The girl who was now 8 months from graduation and dreamed of studying environmental engineering. Dave took a scrap of paper and wrote, "Auction, Lot 247, Umpqua, $2,500. He folded the paper and put it in his work shirt's pocket. It was a desperate gamble from a man who had already lost everything once and couldn't bear the thought of losing again. The next morning at 1:30 p.m., David Robinson would be at the county courthouse with a $2,500 check and a silent prayer that, somehow, that forgotten piece of land might hold an answer to his prayers. The Eugene County Courthouse buzzed with the nervous energy of an ongoing auction. Dave arrived 5 minutes late, still in his work clothes with the smell of the mill clinging to his skin. The hall was nearly empty. Just a few real estate speculators in wrinkled suits and local ranchers looking for cheap pasture. When the auctioneer announced Lot 247, 10 acres in the Umpqua National Forest, a murmur of disinterest swept the room. Dave heard someone whisper, "Cursed land, can't get to it without a helicopter." Opening bid, $2,500. Silence. Dave raised his hand, feeling cold sweat trickle down his back. The auctioneer looked around for other bids that never came. Sold to the gentleman in the flannel for $2,500. 3 hours later, Dave held the deed in his trembling hands as he drove his pickup truck down Highway 126 toward the Cascade Mountains. The GPS had lost signal 15 minutes ago, and now he was following only the coordinates scribbled on the back of an envelope. The paved road had given way to gravel, then to a dirt trail that looked more like a dry riverbed. When he finally stopped the truck, not by choice but because the trail simply ended in a wall of ferns and salmonberries, Dave got out and looked around. The forest rose like a green cathedral around him, trunks of Douglas fir 150 feet tall creating columns that disappeared into the mist. The silence was so thick he could hear his own heart beating. "What the hell did I do?" he muttered to himself. Following the coordinates on the handheld GPS he'd borrowed from work, Dave started hiking into the woods. The terrain was rough, covered by a thick layer of pine needles and decaying leaves that gave way under his feet like a wet sponge. Low branches scratched his face and spiderwebs clung to his hair. After an hour of walking, he found the first sign that this land had once been inhabited, the remnants of a barbed wire fence, now almost swallowed by vegetation. The cedar posts were still standing, but they were covered in vines and moss like green skeletons marking the boundaries of some abandoned dream. It was when he climbed a small rise covered in giant ferns that Dave saw something that shouldn't be there. Between the tree trunks, half hidden by 40 years of wild growth, glinted metal corroded by time. He approached slowly, his heart quickening. As he pushed aside branches and vines, the shape became clearer. It was the fuselage of a helicopter, camouflaged by nature, as if it were part of the forest itself. Dave stopped and swallowed hard. Helicopters don't just fall in the forest and remain intact like this, as if someone had parked it carefully. The metal still bore traces of olive-drab military paint, and on the side, almost faded by time, he could make out numbers and letters. UH-1, Huey. "Shit," he whispered. His basic knowledge of military history, gleaned from watching documentaries with Sarah on weekends, told him this was a Vietnam-era helicopter. But what the hell was a Huey doing buried in the Oregon forest? Dave circled the aircraft slowly, his boots crunching on dry twigs. The fuselage was in surprisingly good condition, protected by the trees that had grown up around it like guardians. The windows were intact, though covered with a thick layer of grime and moss. He tried to open the pilot's door, but it resisted. Decades of moisture had seized the hinges. Dave went back to his pickup, grabbed a pry bar and a flashlight, and returned, determined. If he'd bought cursed land, he was at least going to find out what he was dealing with. After 20 minutes of effort, the door gave way with a metallic groan that echoed through the silent forest. Dave shone the flashlight into the cockpit and his heart nearly stopped. The interior was preserved as if the pilot had just left last week. The instrument still gleamed under the flashlight's beam, the leather seats cracked but whole. And there, on the pilot's seat, something was out of place. The seat was slightly shifted, as if it had been moved recently. Dave touched it tentatively and felt it move. Carefully, he lifted the seat and revealed a hidden compartment underneath, a space that was definitely not part of the Huey's original design. And etched into the metal of the compartment, glinting in the flashlight's beam like a secret whispering in the dark, was a symbol Dave had never seen before, a phoenix, with a single tear falling from its eye. Dave backed away, breathing heavily. Whatever someone had hidden here, they had hidden it for a reason. And now, 40 years later, on his $2,500 piece of property, that secret was waiting to be discovered. Dave couldn't sleep that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the phoenix etched in the metal, its single solitary tear seeming to weep for secrets buried in time. At 5 in the morning, he gave up trying to rest and headed back to the forest, this time bringing a full toolbox and a more powerful flashlight. The morning mist still clung to the trees when he reached the Huey. In the daylight, the aircraft seemed even more surreal, a metallic ghost from the Vietnam War resting in peace among the Oregon pines. Dave took a deep breath and opened the compartment under the pilot's seat again. The space was smaller than he had imagined the night before, but clearly built with purpose. The edges were reinforced and sealed, designed to protect something valuable from moisture and time. Inside, Dave found a standard-issue military metal box, the kind used for ammunition, but modified with additional locks and sealing gaskets. His hands shook as he lifted the box. It was heavy, much too heavy for its size. He shook it gently and heard solid objects shifting inside, but muffled as if they were wrapped in cloth. Back in his pickup, Dave placed the box on the passenger seat and stared at it for several long minutes. Part of him wanted to take it straight to the sheriff, hand it all over and wash his hands of it. But the larger part, the desperate part that pictured Maya going to a state college instead of the University of Oregon, whispered for him to open it. With a screwdriver, Dave pried the first lock open, then the second. The lid opened with a soft hiss as if it had been holding its breath for decades. What he saw made him lose his breath completely. Gold bars gleamed in the filtered forest light, stacked with military precision. Dave counted 12 bars, each the size of a small brick, weighing about 400 ounces. But it wasn't just gold. Nestled between the bars were small velvet pouches, and when Dave opened one with trembling fingers, raw diamonds rolled into his palm like crystallized tears. "My God," he whispered, his voice swallowed by the forest's silence. He held one of the diamonds up to the light. Even in its raw state, its exceptional quality was impossible to miss. Dave had once worked on a remodel for a jeweler's house in Eugene and knew enough to recognize valuable stones. But it was when he saw the papers at the bottom of the box that his world truly turned upside down. Military documents in sealed plastic envelopes, a leather-bound flight log, and yellowed, handwritten letters on Army letterhead. With hands that now trembled uncontrollably, Dave opened the log. The first page was written in a firm, disciplined hand. Captain Samuel J. Foster, 1st Air Cavalry Division, South Vietnam, 1971-1972. If you're reading this, then I either succeeded in my plan or I died trying. My name is Sam Foster from Oak Haven, Oregon, and this is my confession. Dave turned the page, his heart beating like a military drum. March 15, 1972. I found out what Colonel Mitchell and his men are doing. It's not just drug smuggling. They're looting temples, stealing from Vietnamese families, amassing fortunes that should be used to rebuild this devastated country. Today I intercepted one of their shipments, $60 million in gold and precious stones being sent to private accounts in Switzerland. I can't return this to the thieves, but I also can't keep something that was stolen. I plan to fake my death in combat and bring it all home. I'm going to use this fortune to build something that honors both the American and Vietnamese dead, a hospital for veterans in Oak Haven, where broken men like me can find healing. If something happens to me before I can carry out this plan, I leave this responsibility to whoever finds this treasure. It's not mine. It never was. It's a debt America owes to the world, and especially to the sons of Oak Haven who bled on this cursed land. Dave closed the journal, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold it. $60 million. The words danced in his mind like numbers in an impossible lottery. He looked at the gold bars again, now seeing not just precious metal, but the weight of history, of guilt, of responsibility. Sam Foster had risked everything to do what he thought was right, and now, 50 years later, that choice had landed on his doorstep. Dave picked up one of the letters from the bottom of the box. The ink was faded but still legible. "Dear Mom, if you're getting this letter, then things went wrong over here. I want you to know I tried to do the right thing. There's money hidden in the woods behind our property, near the old elk trail. Use it to help the vets who come home broken. Use it to build something good out of this terrible war. Tell the people of Oak Haven that Samuel Foster died trying to honor the uniform he wore. With eternal love, your son." Sam. Dave felt hot tears stream down his face. Sam Foster had never made it home. He had never built his hospital. His mother had probably died without ever knowing her son had been a hero, not a deserter. And now, by some cruel twist of fate, Sam's dream had fallen into the hands of another son of Oak Haven, a man broken by life, desperate for a second chance. Dave looked out through the windshield at the forest stretching around him. Somewhere out there, Sam Foster's remains probably still rested, unknown and unmourned. And here was his legacy, a fortune built on equal parts guilt and hope. $60 million, enough to pay off every medical bill, buy a new house, send Maya to any university she wanted. Enough to change everything. But the final words of the journal echoed in his mind like a whispering ghost. This wealth was never mine. Let it build a future, not just enrich one man. The phoenix only rises when everything else has been reduced to ash. Dave closed the box and placed it back in his pickup. As he drove home, a single question hammered in his head. What would Sam Foster do if he were in Dave's position? And more importantly, what kind of man did Dave want to be when Maya grew up and asked how they had gotten out of poverty? The weight of that decision was heavier than all the gold in the world. In the days that followed, Dave became an obsessed man. Every morning before his shift at the mill, he would drive out to the forest and spend hours in the Huey's cockpit, reading and rereading Sam Foster's journal. At night, after Maya went to sleep, he searched the internet for information on the Vietnam War, the 1st Air Cavalry Division, anything that could make sense of the story he had uncovered. It was in the Eugene Public Library that Dave found the first confirmation that Sam Foster had existed. A microfilm of the local 1972 newspaper had a small obituary notice. Foster, Samuel James, 28, Captain, United States Army, killed in action in South Vietnam on March 22, 1972. Son of Margaret and James Foster of Oak Haven. Survivors include his mother, Margaret Foster, and his sister, Dorothy Foster Kellerman. Memorial services will be held at the Oak Haven Methodist Church. Dave printed the page, his hands shaking. Sam Foster wasn't a legend or a made-up story. He was a real man, with a real family, who had made a desperate choice in a distant war. Driven by a growing need to understand, Dave drove to Oak Haven the following Saturday. The town had changed little since his childhood. It was still the same collection of dusty streets and sun-faded wooden houses, nestled between oak-covered hills. The Methodist church was still there, its stained glass windows catching the afternoon light like old jewels. In the small cemetery behind the church, Dave found what he was looking for, a simple granite headstone with the inscription, Samuel James Foster, 1944-1972, killed in service to his country. There was no body buried there, just a memorial to a man who had disappeared in a forest on the other side of the world. Dave knelt before the headstone, feeling the weight of the irony. Sam was buried not here, but in a forest 50 miles away, next to a helicopter full of secrets he could never share. I found your treasure, Sam, Dave whispered to the silent stone. Now I need to figure out what to do with it. That's when a voice behind him said, Did you know my brother? Dave turned to see an elderly woman, her white hair tied in a bun, leaning on a cane. Her eyes, the same light blue Dave had imagined for Sam Foster, were filled with curiosity and old pain. Not exactly, Dave stammered. I'm Dave Robinson. I found some things that belonged to him. The woman studied his face for a long moment. I'm Dorothy Kellerman. I was Dorothy Foster when Sam died. Come inside. Let's talk. The house was small and smelled of lavender and old memories. The walls were covered with photographs, many of them showing a young man in a military uniform with the same confident smile Dave had pictured while reading the journal. Dorothy served tea in delicate porcelain cups and sat in an armchair that was clearly her usual spot. So, what kind of things did you find? Dave took a deep breath. Letters. A journal. He wrote about plans to build a hospital for veterans here in Oak Haven. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. Mother never stopped waiting for that letter. Sam had promised to write about his plans when he got back. She died in 1985, still checking the mailbox every day. He didn't desert, Dave said softly. Not the way people thought. He was trying to do the right thing. Dorothy leaned forward. How can you be so sure? Dave hesitated, then decided to tell part of the truth. I found evidence that he intercepted something corrupt officers were smuggling. He died trying to bring it back. My God, Dorothy whispered. All these years, people whispered that Sam had run off, that he'd hidden in the jungle instead of fighting. Mother never believed it, but she stood and went to an old dresser, returning with a shoebox full of yellowed papers. These are all the letters Sam wrote home. Maybe they'll help you better understand who he was. Dave spent the next 2 hours reading the letters, with Dorothy sharing memories from each period of Sam's life. The letters painted a portrait of a young idealist who had enlisted believing he was serving a just cause, but who gradually grew disillusioned with the corruption he saw around him. A letter from January 1972 was particularly revealing. Dear Dorothy, things here aren't like in the movies. There are men in positions of power who are using this war to get rich, while enlisted men die for nothing. I've seen things that make me question everything I believed about honor and duty, but I've also seen opportunities to make a difference. If I can pull off what I'm planning, I'll be able to help a lot of vets when we get home. You'll be proud of me, I promise. With love, Sam. He always wanted to be a doctor, Dorothy said, watching Dave read. But we didn't have the money for college. Sam enlisted hoping to use the GI Bill to study medicine when he got back. He used to say he wanted to build a hospital here, where people wouldn't have to drive all the way to Eugene for proper care. In the days that followed, Dave became an obsessed man. Every morning before his shift at the mill, he would drive out to the forest and spend hours in the Huey's cockpit, reading and rereading Sam Foster's journal. At night, after Maya went to sleep, he searched the internet for information on the Vietnam War, the 1st Air Cavalry Division, anything that could make sense of the story he had uncovered. It was in the Eugene Public Library that Dave found the first confirmation that Sam Foster had existed. A microfilm of the local 1972 newspaper had a small obituary notice. Foster, Samuel James, 28, Captain, United States Army, killed in action in South Vietnam on March 22, 1972, son of Margaret and James Foster of Oak Haven. Survivors include his mother, Margaret Foster, and his sister Dorothy Foster Kellerman. Memorial services will be held at the Oak Haven Methodist Church. Dave printed the page, his hands shaking. Sam Foster wasn't a legend or a made-up story. He was a real man, with a real family, who had made a desperate choice in a distant war. Driven by a growing need to understand, Dave drove to Oak Haven the following Saturday. The town had changed little since his childhood. It was still the same collection of dusty streets and sun-faded wooden houses, nestled between oak-covered hills. The Methodist Church was still there, its stained glass windows catching the afternoon light like old jewels. In the small cemetery behind the church, Dave found what he was looking for, a simple granite headstone with the inscription, Samuel James Foster, 1944-1972, killed in service to his country. There was no body buried there, just a memorial to a man who had disappeared in a forest on the other side of the world. Dave knelt before the headstone, feeling the weight of the irony. Sam was buried not here, but in a forest 50 miles away, next to a helicopter full of secrets he could never share. I found your treasure, Sam, Dave whispered to the silent stone. Now I need to figure out what to do with it. That's when a voice behind him said, Did you know my brother? Dave turned to see an elderly woman, her white hair tied in a bun, leaning on a cane. Her eyes, the same light blue Dave had imagined for Sam Foster, were filled with curiosity and old pain. Not exactly, Dave stammered. I'm Dave Robinson. I found some things that belonged to him. The woman studied his face for a long moment. I'm Dorothy Kellerman. I was Dorothy Foster when Sam died. Come inside. Let's talk. The house was small and smelled of lavender and old memories. The walls were covered with photographs, many of them showing a young man in a military uniform with the same confident smile Dave had pictured while reading the journal. Dorothy served tea in delicate porcelain cups and sat in an armchair that was clearly her usual spot. So what kind of things did you find? Dave took a deep breath. Letters. A journal. He wrote about plans to build a hospital for veterans here in Oak Haven. Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. Mother never stopped waiting for that letter. Sam had promised to write about his plans when he got back. She died in 1985. Still checking the mailbox every day. He didn't desert, Dave said softly. Not the way people thought. He was trying to do the right thing. Dorothy leaned forward. How can you be so sure? Dave hesitated, then decided to tell part of the truth. I found evidence that he intercepted something corrupt officers were smuggling. He died trying to bring it back. My God, Dorothy whispered. All these years, people whispered that Sam had run off, that he'd hidden in the jungle instead of fighting. Mother never believed it, but she stood and went to an old dresser, returning with a shoebox full of yellowed papers. These are all the letters Sam wrote home. Maybe they'll help you better understand who he was. Dave spent the next 2 hours reading the letters, with Dorothy sharing memories from each period of Sam's life. The letters painted a portrait of a young idealist who had enlisted believing he was serving a just cause, but who gradually grew disillusioned with the corruption he saw around him. A letter from January 1972 was particularly revealing. Dear Dorothy, things here aren't like in the movies. There are men in positions of power who are using this war to get rich, while enlisted men die for nothing. I've seen things that make me question everything I believed about honor and duty, but I've also seen opportunities to make a difference. If I can pull off what I'm planning, I'll be able to help a lot of vets when we get home. You'll be proud of me, I promise. With love, Sam. He always wanted to be a doctor, Dorothy said, watching Dave read. But we didn't have the money for college. Sam enlisted hoping to use the GI Bill to study medicine when he got back. He used to say he wanted to build a hospital here, where people wouldn't have to drive all the way to Eugene for proper care. Dave felt a chill run down his spine. Sam's dream was exactly what he had written in the journal: a hospital for veterans, a place of healing in a community that desperately needed hope. When he said goodbye to Dorothy, she held his hand for a long moment. "Thank you for giving me my brother back," she said. "For all these years, he was just a name on a headstone. Now I know he died being the man he always was, someone who cared more about others than he did about himself." On the way back home, Dave stopped at the old Foster family property. The house had been torn down decades ago, but the foundations were still visible beneath the tall grass. It was there, walking through the wreckage of an interrupted life, that Dave finally understood the full weight of what he had discovered. It wasn't just a hidden fortune. It was the unfinished dream of a man who had died, trying to atone for the sins of a war. It was the legacy of a family who never knew their son had become a hero. It was the hope of a community that desperately needed healing. And now, all of it was in the hands of Dave, a broken man who had his own family to save, his own dreams to pursue. But as he drove home in the golden sunset light, Dave began to understand something Sam Foster had discovered 50 years earlier. Some things are more important than saving yourself. Some legacies are only valuable when they're shared. The phoenix in the helicopter's compartment wasn't just a symbol, it was a promise. And Dave was beginning to understand that for a phoenix to be reborn, first everything has to burn, including the selfish dreams that keep us from seeing the bigger picture. The first week after discovering Sam Foster's true identity passed in a fever dream. Dave could barely concentrate at work, his hands trembling as he operated the circular saw, his mind constantly returning to the treasure hidden in the forest. At night, he would lie awake doing impossible calculations. 60 million divided by the medical debts, the mortgage, Maya's education. But it was when he started paying off a few small bills that the real problems began. Dave had been careful, very careful. He sold only 2 small raw diamonds to a jeweler in Portland, making up a story about a family inheritance. The money was enough to pay the overdue electric bill and buy decent groceries for the first time in months. Maya even commented at dinner, "Dad, this chicken is delicious. We haven't eaten something this good in a long time." But in Oakhaven, a town where everyone knew everyone else's financial situation, sudden changes didn't go unnoticed. It was Jerry Hawkins, the manager of the local bank, who first raised eyebrows. Dave had deposited $3,200 in cash, a sum that was more than he usually saw in 2 months of work at the mill. "Dave, man," Jerry said when Dave came into the bank the following Friday. "Where'd you get this cash? Not that it's any of my business, but..." "Garage sales," Dave lied, forcing a smile. "Cleaning out Sarah's things, you know how it is." Jerry nodded, but Dave saw the doubt in his eyes. In a small town, lies don't travel far. Things got worse when Dave made the mistake of paying off Maya's doctor's office bill, $847 that had been in collections for 6 months. The receptionist, a woman named Linda who had gone to school with Sarah, called the same day. "Dave, it's Linda from Dr. Peterson's. We received your payment today. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't a mistake. You said you wouldn't be able to pay until summer." "I picked up some extra work," Dave said, his voice sounding strange even to his own ears. "Oh, that's great. Sarah would be proud." But Dave sensed the curiosity behind the kindness. In Oakhaven, good financial news was as rare as snow in July. It was in the second week that the paranoia truly set in. Dave was coming home from work when he noticed a black sedan parked across the street from his house, a car that definitely didn't belong in the neighborhood. When he stopped to get a better look, the car sped off, but not before Dave saw 2 figures in suits in the front seat. That night, he barely touched his dinner. Maya, concerned, asked if he was feeling well. "Just tired, honey," Dave said, but his eyes kept darting to the windows, checking if anyone was watching. The next day at the mill, Mike Peterson pulled him aside during their break. "Dave, I gotta ask you something. Sheriff Mullins was here yesterday asking questions about you." Dave's blood ran cold. "What kind of questions?" "About your financial situation. If you'd mentioned any inheritance or a windfall. Said it was routine, but..." Mike lowered his voice. "Man, are you in some kind of trouble?" "No," Dave said too quickly. "Not that I know of." But inside, his world was crumbling. If the sheriff was asking questions, It meant someone had reported his sudden change in fortune. In a town where everyone knew everyone's story, the sudden appearance of money raised red flags. That night Dave drove out to the forest, needing to see the Huey again, maybe to convince himself he hadn't dreamed it all. But when he got to the site, something was different. There were footprints around the aircraft, footprints that weren't his. Someone had been here. His heart pounding, Dave checked the compartment under the pilot's seat. The box was still there, untouched, but now there was something else. A small surveillance camera attached to the helicopter's internal frame, its red LEDs blinking softly in the darkness. Dave recoiled as if he'd gotten an electric shock. Someone knew. Someone was watching. He drove home in a panic, constantly checking his rearview mirror. Every headlight that appeared behind him felt like a threat. Every shadow in the yard when he got home seemed to hide watching figures. Maya was doing homework at the kitchen table when he walked in, trying to look normal. "Dad, you look scared." "I'm fine, honey," Dave lied, kissing the top of her head. "Just a long day." But inside, he was falling apart. The discovery that was supposed to be his salvation was becoming his nightmare. The weight of Sam Foster's secret wasn't just moral. It was literally dangerous. That night, lying in bed, Dave finally faced the truth he had been avoiding. No matter how hard Sam Foster had tried to do the right thing, he had died for it. And now Dave was walking down the same dangerous path. The treasure in the forest wasn't just a legacy, it was a curse. And Dave began to understand why Sam Foster had written in his journal that the phoenix only rises when everything else has been reduced to ash. Maybe it was time to let it all burn, before the flames consumed not just his life but Maya's too. Outside, a car drove slowly down the street, its headlights sweeping across the bedroom window. Dave got up and peeked through the curtain, but the street was empty and silent. But he knew he wasn't alone. And for the first time since he'd found Sam Foster's journal, Dave wondered if some secrets are better left buried forever. The decision came on a cold October morning, when Dave found Maya in the kitchen holding an envelope from the University of Oregon. Her hands trembled as she read the letter, and when she looked up, her eyes were full of tears. "Dad, they rescinded my partial scholarship. They said there are too many qualified applicants and—" Her voice broke. "I guess I'll have to go to community college after all." Dave looked at his daughter, this bright, brave girl who had taken care of Sarah in her final months, who never complained when they ate ramen noodles for a whole week, who studied by candlelight when the power was out, and something inside him finally broke. Not the pain, the confusion. "Maya," he said, kneeling in front of his daughter, "you're going to the University of Oregon, I promise. Dad, we don't have— Trust me, honey. Just trust me." That night, after Maya was asleep, Dave drove to the forest for the last time as a divided man. He sat in the Huey's cockpit, Sam Foster's journal open in his hands, and read the words that had become his mantra once more. This wealth was never mine. Let it build a future, not just enrich one man. For the first time in weeks, Dave didn't feel like a thief or a hunted man. He felt like an heir, not to Sam Foster's money, but to his mission. The next morning, David Robinson made 3 phone calls that would change not only his life, but the entire town of Oak Haven. The first was to Sheriff Tom Mullins. "Tom, it's Dave Robinson. I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come by my house today?" The second was to Dorothy Kellerman. "Mrs. Kellerman, I found more things about your brother, things that will make you even prouder of him." The third was to a journalist at the Eugene Register Guard, who had written a series on Vietnam veterans. "I have a story for you," Dave said. A story about a hero who never got the recognition he deserved. At 2 in the afternoon, they were all gathered in Dave's living room. Maya had come home from school and, confused but trusting, sat beside her father on the worn-out couch. Dave took a deep breath and began to tell the story, the whole story. He talked about the desperate auction, about finding the Huey, about Sam Foster's journal and the fortune hidden for 50 years. He showed them the letters, the military documents, the photographs. He told them about Sam's plans to build a hospital for veterans, about how he had died trying to do the right thing. When he finished, the silence in the room was deafening. It was Dorothy who spoke first, tears streaming down her face. "My brother, he really was the man I always thought he was." Sheriff Mullins, a Vietnam veteran himself, cleared his throat with difficulty. "Dave, you know that technically this should be reported as a federal archaeological find?" "I know," Dave said calmly, "and that's exactly what I'm doing." The journalist leaned forward. "Mr. Robinson, are you aware of the estimated value of this discovery?" $60 million, Dave answered without hesitation. Enough money to solve all my family's problems for the rest of our lives. Then why? Dave looked at Maya, who was watching him with a mixture of awe and confusion. Because I want my daughter to grow up knowing there are things more important than money. Because Sam Foster died believing that some battles are worth fighting, even when you know you might lose them. He stood up and went to the window, looking out at the street where he had grown up, where Sarah had dreamed of growing old, where Maya had taken her first steps. Sam Foster wanted to build a hospital here, a place where veterans and families like ours could get care without having to drive to Eugene or Portland. I want to finish what he started. What followed was a month of headlines, federal investigations, and the kind of attention a town like Oakhaven had never received. The story of Sam Foster, the captain who intercepted stolen gold and died trying to use it to help his fellow veterans, captured the nation's imagination. Dave was questioned, investigated, and ultimately cleared of any wrongdoing. The federal government, pressured by the media coverage and by politicians who saw a positive public relations opportunity, agreed to an unprecedented settlement. The treasure would be used exactly as Sam Foster had planned, to build a hospital for veterans. Dave would be appointed administrator of the Foster Foundation that would oversee the project, with a salary that would comfortably secure his family's future. Maya would receive a full scholarship to any university she chose, funded by the interest from the trust. But it was on the day of the project's groundbreaking ceremony that Dave finally understood the true value of his decision. Hundreds of people gathered on the land where the Foster Memorial Veterans Hospital would be built. Veterans traveled from all over Oregon to be there. Families who had lost loved ones in the war carried photographs and flowers. Dorothy Kellerman, now 89, cut the inaugural ribbon with hands that were trembling but proud. The Huey, carefully restored, was installed as the centerpiece of the memorial on the hospital grounds. Dave stepped up to the makeshift podium, looking out at the hundreds of faces turned toward him. Maya was in the front row, smiling through her tears. Beside her, Dorothy held a folded American flag, the one that had covered Sam's empty casket at the memorial service 50 years ago. "My name is Dave Robinson," he began, his voice carrying across the silent crowd. "And a year ago, I was a desperate man who thought he had lost everything. I thought I had bought a worthless piece of land out of desperation." He paused, looking toward the clearing where soon a hospital would rise that would save lives and heal wounds that went far beyond the physical. "In truth, I bought a legacy, a responsibility, a chance to finish what a hero started 50 years ago." Dave looked at the restored Huey, where a new plaque gleamed in the sun. "Captain Samuel J. Foster, 1944-1972. Your mission is complete. Sam Foster taught me that some things are more valuable than gold, that a man isn't measured by what he accumulates, but by what he builds. That true wealth isn't in what we keep for ourselves, but in what we leave behind." Applause echoed through the clearing, but Dave barely heard it. His eyes were fixed on Maya, who stood up and walked toward him. When she reached the podium, she whispered, "I'm so proud of you, Dad." And in that moment, with his daughter by his side and Sam Foster's dream finally becoming a reality, Dave Robinson knew he had made the right choice. 6 months later, as the first beams of the hospital were raised, Dave received a letter addressed simply to the Keeper of the Phoenix. Inside was just one sentence, written in a hand he recognized from the military documents. "Thank you for bringing our light back home." There was no signature, but Dave knew who it was from. Some anonymous veteran, someone who had served with Sam, someone who had finally seen the mission completed. Dave folded the letter carefully and put it in his wallet, next to a photo of Maya on the day she received her acceptance letter from the University of Oregon. The Phoenix had been reborn from the ashes, not just once, but many times over. In the life of Sam Foster, in the decision of Dave, in the hospital that grew from the ground where once there was only a silent forest. And every time Dave passed the construction site and saw veterans receiving care they couldn't afford, every time he saw families being healed from invisible wounds, he heard Sam Foster's voice whispering through the wind in the trees. "Mission accomplished, soldier. Mission accomplished." Dave Robinson had found much more than a buried treasure in the Oregon forest. He had found his own soul, and discovered that the real value wasn't in the gold he had discovered, but in the man he had become by choosing to do the right thing. The Phoenix wept tears of joy. Dave Robinson proved that some treasures only shine when they are shared, that true wealth is not in what we accumulate, but in what we build for others. And that sometimes, when we lose everything, we finally find everything that truly matters. If you were touched by this story of transformation and courage, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring narratives. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that doing the right thing is always worth it, even when it costs everything. And in the comments, let us know, what legacy do you want to leave for future generations?